Hey. So I wanted to start today's session with a bit of an interactive discussion for you, just to bring you into that headspace of thinking about inclusive language in volunteer recruitment, and inclusive language more generally. I know that we've all had busy mornings doing various different bits and bobs within our home starts. So just to bring us into that headspace, I wonder if I can ask you to participate in a session where we're going to use some polls, some word clouds, and use the chat for a moment. I would like to say that polls will be anonymous. If you can possibly think about what does inclusive language mean and why does inclusive language matter? So I think our first is a word cloud asking the question, why does inclusive language matter?
So you can either use the QR code on screen, or you can head over to slido.com. I've also put the link to the Slido in the chat, and just use the room code 2919205. And then you should see the first question there, which is, why does inclusive language matter? I'll just give you a minute to do that one. We've got some people typing. I do love it when it says typing. You can see.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Sorry, guys, can we see the code again? Thanks.
The code's 2919205 if you need that. 2919205. So if it would be all right to see some of the answers, Yvonne, I know as obviously people are kind of filling that in, it will populate and answers will still be coming in.
Yeah.
From what I saw, there were some important words starting to emerge and starting to jump out already. So one of the words I just saw there was welcoming. And yes, absolutely, especially in volunteer recruitment, we want everyone who comes to join Home Start as an organisation to feel welcome. I see the word connect, appropriate, yep. Feeling seen, feeling validated, creating a sense of belonging. These are all really, really important things. And we all know, and sort of maybe a moment of self-reflection for ourselves, this isn't something that I'm asking you to share publicly, we're just thinking about sort of those positive and not so positive attributes, the things about our personality that we know we have. And that idea about that being recognized by other people, that we always want people to recognize our most positive attributes and kind of see the good in us. And that's something that we really do obviously want other people to connect with and to look at. So imagining that for your volunteers and for other people who are joining your organization. So if people are describing you, how would you want them to describe you? And I just leave that question lingering in the air for a little while, not for anything to go in the chat or for anything to go into a Slido or a word cloud, but just for you to think about and reflect on. When people are describing you, how would you like them to describe you? Just thinking about that for a moment. And thinking about how you would like to be introduced, how you would like people to be putting you across to others in the room. So moving on to our next word cloud, we are going to just ask you for a moment that if I say the word criminal, what image comes to mind? What might you associate when you hear the word criminal? Prison, right, yep. A baddie. Aggressive, negative visual. Judged. Mugshot. Yes, it's quite a loaded word, isn't it? The word criminal. I don't know about anybody else, but I get an image of somebody wearing black clothing for some reason. Um, the idea that the word criminal is quite a loaded word. It carries a lot of heavy meaning with it, as we can see from the words coming through in the word cloud. Dangerous, yes. Law breaking. Yeah, so these words carry quite heavy meaning with them, and they're loaded with imagery and stereotypes from society. So we need to be careful how we're using our language. So what if I told you that this person received a speeding ticket when they were young, a one-off, one-time mistake, something that arguably anyone could make a mistake with regards to? So how does that then change your image and your thought processes around that person? And I think the point here was really around the difference between saying that this person is a criminal, or this is a person with a criminal record, that actually changing how we use our words can remove that stigma and can remove some of that personalization, that it takes the person and the behavior and makes them separate. So the person is not the behavior, the person and the behavior are two separate entities. And person with can identify, can be used in a lot of context, and how it makes people feel and how it makes them feel uncomfortable. So it could be with relation to refugee status, for example, that person is a refugee, or this is a person with refugee status. This is a disabled person, or somebody who is suffering from a health condition. And all of these are examples of how we use language in a way that we just need to be a little bit alert to and a little bit aware of. So we've got now a video that I think Yvonne is loading up for us on using inclusive language in the workplace. And it's originally a video that was used during Race Equality Week, but I think it summarizes the point that we're making quite nicely, and it actually gives some examples about how language can be a little bit stigmatizing. So Yvonne, when you're ready.
Inclusive language in the workplace is incredibly important. Words matter. Words can evoke emotions such as anger, rage, disruption, disengagement, but words can also help empower, engage, influence, and inspire. So we talk about inclusive language because people will really pay attention to what you are saying, and you have to be mindful in how you may say certain things. So think about some of the words you might be using, like blacklist. Blacklist is something that we would not recommend that you use, and you may want to use something like blocklist. How would you address a room when you walk in? Would you say, how are you doing, guys? You know, guys is quite genderized, so you may want to say people or folks or something a little bit different. So just be really mindful about some of the language. It's not about policing the language. It's not about telling someone that you are wrong. It's about educating and helping them understand why certain words may not be acceptable in current times.
Thanks, Yvonne. So I think that video also starts to identify that we can use language in quite an empowering way, that actually it can be quite a positive thing. So very quickly, before we go into our first segment from Home Start Suffolk, I'd like to invite you to take part in a poll, which is entirely and completely anonymous, and it's just asking, how confident do you feel that your Home Start always uses inclusive language? And that's optional participation. Please take part if you wish to, and again, entirely anonymous. But how confident do you feel that your Home Start always demonstrates and uses this type of inclusive language?
That's again on the same Slido link that you've just used for the other word clouds.
Thanks, Yvonne. So we don't need to share that one, Yvonne. That's something that if people are sort of happy to use as a reflection, that's absolutely fine. do obviously have a think about that. We hope that you find some inspiration in today's content. And with that, I would like to introduce a pre-recorded segment. Alison and Ellen from Home Start Suffolk are unable to join us today, as I believe they are on a team away day. But they have pre-recorded a segment with us about their volunteer recruitment. And I think certainly in terms of that positive engagement with language, you'll hear some lovely examples here about how they do that. So Yvonne, if you kindly play that video, please.
I would like to introduce you today, Alison Grant from Home Start Suffolk and Ellen Taylor from Home Start Suffolk. Thank you very much for joining us today. If I could ask you please to introduce yourselves and your job titles, a little bit about your Home Start and what you do.
Of course. Hi, Claire. I'm Alison Grant. I'm Family Support Manager at Home Start Suffolk, and I lead the team of coordinators and oversee the referrals that we accept into the organisation.
Hi, I'm Ellen Taylor. I am the Volunteer Recruitment Officer here, and all of the volunteers that come through from inquiry all the way through to trained volunteers, I help them in that process.
That's great, thank you. And can you tell us a little bit more about Home Start Suffolk and the region you cover? I understand you've got quite a geographic spread, is that right?
Yeah, we're a county-wide service, so we cover the whole of Suffolk. So that includes big towns like Ipswich, Lowestoft, Bury St Edmunds. So we've got some urban areas, but we've got some extremely rural areas as well that we cover. We've got 3 areas of deprivation in the area that we cover, Lowestoft being in the top 10. So a lot of need in the Lowestoft area. We've also got 3 army and forces bases that we're working with and supporting across the county. But we've got approximately 280 volunteers that are registered with us currently. Some of them are resting. They're not all absolutely active at this moment in time, but we're really lucky to have the number of volunteers that we've got.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alison. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your volunteer base.
So we currently have 280 volunteers. Not all of them are active at this moment in time. Some of them are resting. Our volunteers range in age from 20 to 93, which is really quite impressive. We're predominantly female-based volunteers, but we do have increasing numbers of male volunteers that are coming through, and the volunteer recruitment team are doing a great job at getting out there and going to different venues to attract different kinds of volunteers coming through. So we're spending a lot more time going to colleges and universities, talking to students to see if they're interested in volunteering alongside their college or university work that they're doing. And yeah, I think we've got different kinds of volunteers in different areas of the county, depending on the socio-economic group that there is around.
That's a really interesting point, and I wonder if you can develop on that. You mentioned about volunteer recruitment in the colleges and with that younger student audience. Your volunteer recruitment strategy must be, like most of us, sort of taking inspiration from lots of different areas. Do you have any one particular approach that you find to be really successful? Are there different things you've tried that you think other home starts might find success in, like you have?
I'm sure everybody on this call has got amazing ideas for volunteer recruitment, but some of the things that we found that have worked really well is different approaches depending on where we are looking for volunteers. So different approaches in different areas of the county. So where we look at what's available for us in the way of media to get out there to speak to people. So some areas of the county we know particularly respond to social media adverts, and we can see how many people are looking at social media adverts and how many follow through and how many come through to Ellen to have that conversation and to follow through with an application. Other areas of our county will prefer seeing somebody at a local supermarket on a Friday morning where they can speak to somebody about volunteering and possibly have the opportunity in the first hand to speak to a volunteer, somebody who's volunteering with us now. So we don't have one approach, and we sometimes dip into different things as well. Something that worked particularly well 6 months ago, we'll kind of have a think about how we might change that. So we don't have one kind of set mold. We're always trying to be inventive and gain feedback from our volunteers at interviews and different conversations that we've had with them about, what interested you in coming to volunteer? Was there a key message that we said, or was it the environment that we met you in? What was it that kind of tempted you or made you think about coming to volunteer with us? And what did we do as a process? What was helpful for you in that journey to become a volunteer that you liked?
That's really wonderful to hear. I think diverse means and methods of recruiting volunteers is always a very sensible path to take. Can you tell me how you use storytelling in volunteer recruitment? For those who are in the audience today that maybe attended our previous session, they'll recall that we've talked a little bit this Volunteers Week about storytelling and celebrating volunteer stories. What stories have really helped you to recruit volunteers?
I think right now, Claire, I'm sure everybody on this call will acknowledge that recruiting volunteers is a challenge for us. And so it's always thinking what's going to make Homestart different to another organisation, what's going to tempt somebody. If you go out to a local kind of supermarket, I'm sure we see kind of probably 10 or 15 posters on that board asking for volunteers. So what's going to make Homestart stand out? And I think as an experience, we've got lots to offer from Homestart: the training, the support, the opportunities that are available to people when they volunteer with Homestart. But I think ultimately Ellen and I will recognise, and what we talk to volunteers about during their interview processes, they really want information and fact find about what actually is volunteering going to be like. What kind of families am I going to be supporting? What am I going to be expected to do as a volunteer for that family? And where are the boundaries around volunteering, and what's my role and what's somebody else's role? Where does the coordinator fit into this, and where do I fit in? What's my role to support the family? So telling stories is really important to us, and what we have tried and has worked really well, and we've had a really positive response for, is where, obviously not breaching GDPR and confidentiality, we will tell the story of a local family to the area that we're advertising in. So something that will evoke something in people, something that possibly they will recognise in something they've experienced themselves, or a challenge that they know is out there right now. And where we've told that story and we've given the story names and what the scenario is and what the kind of support and help that family are asking for, is we have people calling the office saying, I'd really like to support, and the name of the person that we've put into that story. What can I do? How can I support that person? Which obviously leads on to the conversation about training and becoming a volunteer with us in Homestart. But that's not just the only way that we use stories.
Yeah, and I think that human connection is so important, and that's one of the really big motivations behind volunteering is that volunteer desire to help and to connect with people. That is so important, and maybe this is a good place to bring in Ellen, because Alison has alluded to that volunteer recruitment process, the training that you put in place and the support that volunteer receives once they make contact with you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what inclusive recruitment means to you in your day-to-day work?
Yes, so when a person inquires, that comes through, and we like to get in touch with them to tell them more about our scheme and more about Homestart and how they can help. We always ask where they've seen us, so that we know that how we can, where we are advertised and how we can make that better, or if that's a really good key for advertisement to get volunteers through. They can then get sent our application form, and then on there is all their details, and for us to get to know them as a person and how and their skills and where they best lie. Once their application form come back in, we set up a Zoom meeting where we have a interview with them. We ask them questions, as Alison said, and it's to form a conversation for us to know them and their skills and where they lie, why they want to volunteer, and about Home Start in Suffolk and how we can support them and in their volunteering journey. Really, we always say to them that they are not just a volunteer. A lot of our volunteers say, "Oh, I'm just a volunteer," and Alison always says, "You know, you're not just a volunteer. What you do is so important and obviously a key to us. We are our volunteers. They are, and they need to know that they are important, and what they're doing is really good."
And maybe just to add to that, I think Ellen and I will spend quite a long time going through somebody's application before the interview. We'll go through kind of certain points that maybe we want to pick up on. Certainly for me, asking the questions, Ellen tends to write the notes and I kind of lead the conversation. But it's really about picking out that volunteer skills and kind of describing to them, you know, from that interview, roles that we think that they might be good at, explaining to them, you know, telephone support, home visiting support, group support. So people who are maybe anxious about doing home visiting and telephone support, we can really talk about group work and how you can grow in confidence in that. But as Ellen said, I kind of always say at interview, we kind of ban the word just at Home Start, because you're not just anything, you know, you're really important. And those people that say, "Oh, I haven't done anything since I left school, I've just been a parent," but being a parent is huge, and those kind of life skills that you're going to bring as a volunteer. So we're really trying to build the confidence in volunteers and what they're going to bring to the organisation and what they're going to be able to share, but also about the importance of the training and how that fits in and the support that they're going to receive in the way of supervision and additional training in that journey.
That's really useful to hear and understand. Thank you for providing such a good understanding of the support that you do offer. It sounds like a very personalised process. You talk about matching volunteers and finding the correct role for them. I guess, can you tell me a little bit more about that, about what the volunteer brings to it and finding that right role for the volunteer, something that's really going to sing to them and kind of meet with their personal motivations for volunteering?
I think one of the things that Ellen and I talk about in interview is the importance of choice in volunteering. We always say that Ellen and I are members of staff, and we sometimes don't have a choice about something we have to do. But as a volunteer, you do have a choice, and I think it's really important that we listen to volunteers when they talk about that choice. We invest a huge amount in our volunteers in that time, right from the first conversation that Ellen or the volunteer recruitment coordinators have with people. So it's important that we listen and we don't kind of talk about tokenism, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but it is a follow through all the way from that listening, and that there is that choice element, whether it's around a family that they're asked to support in a scenario, those volunteers that say they're a little bit anxious about doing telephone or home visiting support. So in that way, group work and working alongside coordinators and also alongside other volunteers who are going to role model as well. We can sometimes put volunteers together to encourage and share skills and talk about situations and scenarios. So everybody in the organisation has a role to play in supporting and encouraging people in that volunteer role. But I think listening to volunteers is really, really key, because otherwise we are at risk of losing people, which is the last thing that we want to do right now.
Oh, absolutely. When it's so difficult to get volunteers anyway, you really want to be making sure that retention is as good as it can be. No, I agree 100%. I was interested and reflecting on just in your process, it sounds like it's a very supportive process. And I certainly know from conversations I've had with you in the past, you've got a very nurturing approach. And I just wonder how the language you use helps to create that feeling of support for the volunteer and encourage that atmosphere of inclusivity. Do you spend a lot of time thinking about the language you use, or is it kind of embedded and just natural within your approach? Have you got any specific tips or tricks for others?
I'm not sure, really.
I think it depends on who you are talking to. It depends on how you see their inquiry, or the application. With an inquiry phone call, you can get not much information from somebody, but you could actually get quite a bit of information from somebody. And I think it stems from that. I think you then get to know the person you're talking to, what they wish to provide and how they wish to volunteer, and then you gauge with that and with them, and then you do put a lot into it, because volunteering is a big thing.
I think the only thing I'd add to that, Claire, is going back to kind of reading that application and being familiar with the information that's in it, because you can start an interview and that person is very, very flat, and they actually don't sound like the same person that you read an application about. But then it's finding that question that actually you ask and they just open up. It's like a flower blooming. You just have asked something that they respond to, and it's like a completely different person. You've kind of got them on board then, and the conversation just changes. And I think Ellen and I probably can think of a number of volunteers who we've absolutely been in that situation with. We kind of, I never like to use that chat on Teams or whatever, because I'm always worried I'm going to talk to the whole group, not just one person. But I'm sitting here thinking, this isn't the application that I read and I thought about, but it's definitely thinking about that language and relating things back to them, but asking those inquiring questions that make that person feel important, and that we're valuing what they're going to bring to volunteering, and them as an individual, and that we need them. We need a cohort of volunteers that are all different, because our families that we support in Homestart are all different. And I believe that there's a volunteer for every family and a family for every volunteer. So sometimes when we see somebody that maybe doesn't fit the actual mold and that they're a little bit different, well, we need to embrace and celebrate that little bit different, and they will be an amazing addition to our team, and there will always be a family for them.
That's lovely, Alison. That's a really wholesome thought, I think, to finish that point. I wonder if you can tell me about your work with external partners. You mentioned previously about working with colleges and working with that student volunteering audience. Can you tell me about your work with external partners to recruit volunteers, and how well versed have you found external partners at that inclusive mindset with regards to volunteer recruitment? Have you found that the partners you've worked with has developed an understanding as you have, or is that something that's still emerging?
I think it's an emerging, developing area for us. But in the last 6 months, we've had 3 inquiries from Anglia Ruskin University, from the University of Suffolk with regards to paramedics who are interested in finding out more about Homestart and also signposting. So they're looking at using us for some student placements. And we've got an amazing relationship with the University of East Anglia as well. And the coordinators in the team have really enabled that relationship. It's that reputation of the work that we've been undertaking that have enabled us to have those approaches from people, and that kind of network of knowing what we're doing and some of the work that we're undertaking. So our infant massage, our Mums in Mind programme, those are the things that particularly the University of East Anglia, who train midwives, are interested in. And every year for the last 3 years, 2 of our coordinators have been to talk to the student midwives. They do a presentation, and from that we've had students on placement. They've done their projects about Homestart, which means that when they qualify and they go out there into the community or in hospitals, they've got an awareness of Home Start, so that the knock-on is really good for us. We've also got local colleges that are approaching us for student placements as well. So it enables us to build on our volunteer numbers, albeit sometimes for a shorter period of time than we would like, but we value that support. And obviously we're supporting people to train as part of their journey into a profession in family support.
Just thinking about all the volunteers within your team, you did mention having some resting volunteers, and obviously you have volunteers in different roles across different sections and areas of the county. How do you create the feeling of a volunteer community? How do you keep people together in that sense of unity, that they are Home Start volunteers, Home Start Suffolk volunteers?
So the coordinators working across the county do an amazing job at including volunteers in everything that's going on. So we have newsletters that go out to people, whether they're an active or a resting volunteer. Volunteers are all invited to peer group support sessions. We had our first ever volunteer conference last year where we had 140 volunteers attend, and we had a day of workshops and lunch and volunteers from right across the county attending, along with members of staff and members of our board as well. So there was a really nice interaction, and that our board of trustees finding out and speaking firsthand to other volunteers that had met on training when they first trained to become a volunteer, who maybe hadn't seen each other, got the opportunity to meet up as well. So there are lots of opportunities during the year to meet up and engage with each other, as well as regular monthly supervision with individual coordinators. But coordinators are always available, as are Tara and myself, to speak to volunteers and to follow up if they've got any queries or worries.
And final question, and thank you so much for your time. Are there any tips or tricks for Home Starts in the audience who are listening? What have you learnt about adapting your language and your approach across different communities to advertise and recruit volunteers?
I think be open-minded, be creative. Don't ever think that you've got the model that works. I think, be consistent in thinking about how to approach different areas, different markets to go to, whether it's places of employment. I was just thinking about, we sit opposite BT, British Telecom, and when we looked at doing some male recruitment, we looked at very much an advert to sit with BT and their employers about maybe male volunteers that might like to help people with job application forms or homework, computer, IT. So really thinking about and looking at your market and thinking what's available out there. There are so many skills out in the community that could be wasted or could be lost. So yeah, just an ongoing journey of thinking about what's available, what's out there, and never say never. It's always worth a try. Only two answers, yes or no. So yeah, keep trying.
Ellen, do you want to add anything?
No, I think Alison said it perfectly, if I'm honest.
I think the other thing I would just say is be excited about volunteering, and what it brings to people individually, as well as to those families that you're going to be supporting. And I would say, I think you're going to be doing something that's really amazing, that you don't really understand at the time what it's going to bring to you and the families that you support.
And yes, thank you so much to Alison and to Ellen from Home Start Suffolk for their time. It was a real pleasure speaking with them. And I think there's one quote there that Yvonne and I found particularly moving when we met to record this session. And it's the point about, I believe there's a volunteer for every family and a family for every volunteer. It's just such a lovely sort of take home thought from that piece. But now I would like to introduce you please, to Joe Boseman from Homestart Hull, who is joining us live and is going to speak to us a little bit in conversation about what they do at Homestart Hull with regards to inclusive practice. So welcome, Joe. It's lovely to have you today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And I wonder if I could ask you just to start off by telling us a little bit about your role and a little bit about Homestart Hull.
Yeah, sure. So I've been with Homestart for 15 years now. I started as a volunteer in 2007 and then became a staff member, a coordinator in 2009. We are a small team compared to some of the teams I'm sure around our whole scheme. We have 6 coordinators. We have a small team of admin, family support worker, and obviously our team of trustees. All our coordinators and basically all our staff are part-time, so the only full-time member of staff is our scheme manager, Caroline, who I'm sure most of you are aware of. She delivers the BHBF project. We also are really fortunate to have 3 projects as well as our core work. So we have our Families in Mind project, which is funded by Henry Smith. And we have our Parent Infant Wellbeing, which is Start for Life, and that supports families with small children up to 2 years. And we've been successful in getting another year's funding for that, along with our dads. So that's a dads project, which is supporting dads and also recruiting male volunteers to support with that project. And that again has a year of funding. They've had 2 years previous to that, but we were fortunate to get another year, which is really, really good.
Wow, that's amazing. Definitely enough to keep you busy, Joe.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your volunteer team then, please?
Certainly. So currently we have a team of 42 active volunteers. So, we are quite a small team. We normally have around 50 to 60, but recruitment, at the moment can be really, really challenging. Our team is mainly white British, but that is a reflection on our community. Hull has a population of about 300,000 people and it is 89% white British. It is becoming more diverse, but generally speaking, it is a white British population. With our volunteers, we have 3 new male volunteers who are supporting with our project. And we also have some families that come forward to volunteer following, a period of support, when they've had the time to be able to give something back. It's always brilliant when that happens. We feel that we've done a good job when they want to come back as volunteers.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a real moment, isn't it? I think that transition. And I
Definitely.
recall, Joe, when we met in advance of this session and we were speaking about having a flexible approach to volunteer recruitment and making sure that volunteer adverts are clear and accessible. That was something that we reflected on. And I wonder if you could tell the audience a little bit more about how you achieved that at Homestart Hull.
Yeah, sure. So we do a lot of our posts, our social media posts. We always use simple, plain language. The average reading age for an adult in Hull is around 9 years old. So we have to be really, really mindful with the language that we use. We always keep it jargon free. I know personally, people start to use jargon language, you do tend to sort of like shut off, especially if you don't understand, what's being said. We try not to put too much information as well into anything that we do, and we try and encourage more of a give us a call, can we meet up for a chat kind of approach. We always found that is far more beneficial. It sort of reduces that anxiety around applying to be a volunteer if it's something very new to you as an individual. So we understand that we don't want to overwhelm our prospective volunteers from that early application. We're always quite clear around you know, what our expectations are, not only of them, but what their expectations are of us as well. So we have quite open language, informal chats, and we will do that wherever's comfortable as well. Not everybody wants to come into an office environment for that first sort of like meet up. So we will go to any lengths, you know, we'll meet in the community, you know, family hubs, whatever that volunteer feels comfortable doing, that's what we'll do to support them on their journey.
And that's lovely because again, that's linking, I think, with what Home Start Suffolk were talking about, is that very personalised approach to volunteer recruitment. I wonder, what sort of adaptations have you ever needed to make in the past for volunteers joining your team? Has that been something you've had to do? And could you talk us through maybe an example?
Yes, certainly. So we will, again, during the sort of first meetups, this is why we like to do face-to-faces, so we can have a chat, talk about what they want, what they need to make it comfortable in that environment. I've had one lady that had recently had hearing aids. She was just, you know, getting used to them. She was quite self-conscious about that. So we had a meetup. She saw the training room. She chose where she wanted to sit so that she could see my face all the time. We always make sure that we are forward facing as well when we deliver any form of training or meetups, so that, you know, she could sort of read my lips, she could feel comfortable in the environment. So when she came on that first session, it wasn't, you know, alien to her. We're always sort of relaxed in our approach to delivering any form of training. We encourage our volunteers to, you know, bring in snacks. We provide snacks, plenty of hot drinks. You know, we want to encourage people to feel comfortable. Volunteers are very precious to us as an organisation, and so we need to be able to sort of confidently say, you know, we will go to any lengths to make any adjustments that we can, and to make it a comfortable, inclusive learning environment for our volunteers.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jo, for providing such a detailed answer. I wonder, with the socioeconomic sort of fabric within your area, how do you support volunteers who might face those type of barriers to volunteering and to participation, things around sort of transport and childcare needs, or maybe they just have limited time that makes it more difficult for them to volunteer? I guess, do many of your volunteers work as well?
Yeah. So we found, especially coming out of lockdown, a lot of our volunteers did go back into work. We did lose quite a lot of volunteers, I think, as well with the cost of living crisis. That's also impacted on us as a scheme. So again, when we get volunteers on board, we need to really look after them. So we really think carefully logistically. So we will talk to them about where they want support. And if phone support would be better for them because of travel and time. We will prepay travel as well. So again, for volunteers, rather than claiming their expenses at support and supervision every 4 to 6 weeks, you know, we can prepay that again to reduce any sort of financial burden on our volunteers. And also, again, we're quite flexible in regards to how they volunteer. So some volunteers don't support during school holidays because of the childcare cost implication. So again, that would be something that we would discuss with the volunteer and with the potential family that we're going to match them with. And, you know, we can come to we can make a plan basically. So if the volunteer is unable to support during holidays, you know, a coordinator will step into that role temporarily. So the family is still getting the support, but the volunteer doesn't feel the stress and worry of the family and what's going to happen while I'm not there.
That's amazing, because I mean, so many of these sort of barriers to volunteering are things that are commonly discussed. So it's lovely to hear that. And I know that when we spoke, we also talked about digital equity. You know, we were thinking about barriers that the volunteer team might experience with regards to their confidence in using computers. And that's not an uncommon comment from the network and from volunteering organisations more generally. How do you address that?
Okay. Yeah, again, because of the age range with our volunteers, we have some that are very confident and are very, able, and then we have those that aren't, so myself included. We've got a lot of support. So for volunteers that are struggling with that, we do have some spare tablets in our office that they can learn to make life easier because again, sometimes online training or, charity log to do it on a phone can be really quite problematic. So again, we can offer on Learn a device to make it a little bit more comfortable. For those volunteers that really don't want to, and we do have a few, not many, that really do struggle with technology. So again, we can't use that as a barrier. So we will offer, paper format. So rather than having to input their own diary entries onto Charity Log, we'll just take the diary sheet and basically we will do that on their behalf. It's really important to have your support and supervision sessions, and especially if volunteers aren't using Charity Log to keep their diary sheets up to date. Again, it's really important to maintain those sort of like connections and relationships so we can support them and make sure that everything is actually okay without having that ability to be able to check it all the time, if that makes sense, which you can do when they are entering their own information, their own records. But again, it's just about listening to our volunteers. We don't want to put any barriers in place. And, if that means, not using technology, then that's absolutely fine. We've got some amazing volunteers in Hull. They've got such a wealth of experience, but technology is not that thing. And
No, no, not their forte, is it? And
yeah,
I think this is the thing. It's about simple actions, isn't it? Simple
yeah,
actions to help
absolutely.
overcome barriers. So just sort of thinking back to your lady with, who recently had the hearing aids. It's just a
Mhm.
simple thing about seeing the training room beforehand. And I honestly, Joe, I could talk volunteering with you all day. I really could. But I wonder if maybe it might be nice to open it up to the room to see if anybody else has got any
Sure.
questions to ask you. Um, just to see if anybody would like to put anything into the chat or raise a hand if you've got a question for Joe or a question for Home Start Suffolk that we can kind of make record of and pass on to them. We'd be very happy to facilitate that message. So I'll just give you a few moments to kind of think and have some uptake time. If anyone's got a question, please do feel free to pop that in the chat. I can see a question that's come through from Home Start Wrexham. It says, how do you manage working volunteers, for example, evening visits and weekend visits?
Okay, so Hull, we do not do weekends and we do not do evenings. It's all around volunteer safety. And for the majority, most of our volunteers want to support during that school drop-off and school pick-up period. But we don't have the resources to be able to roll that out over a weekend as we stand staffing wise, just funding restrictions as well.
And I know that that's not unusual. That's a very common picture, isn't it, across and I think a lot of volunteers, sort of have their own families and
Absolutely.
struggle in the
Mm,
evenings and at weekends
yeah.
themselves. Anyone else coming through in the chat? Or would anyone like to raise a hand if you'd like to speak? You're very welcome to.
I think we've
No,
got
that's
Kathy. Kathy, are you waving at me or are you
Yes,
just...
Kathy from Aberdeen. Just while we're in this forum, I wondered whether most schemes are still using hybrid training. We still use Learning Centre and then bring the volunteers together. We haven't reverted back to what I'll call the olden days when we used to try and get volunteers in together for 8 consecutive weeks. I just wondered whether, other schemes have reverted back and whether they've found that that's been a better way of training.
Joe, how do you do it at Home Start
Right,
Hull?
okay, yeah. We originally, well, back in the day, it used to be 10 weeks, then it reduced to 8, and we do it over 5 now. So the majority of our training face-to-face is over a 5-week period, and that's one session a week, usually between the hours of 9:30 and 2:30. And we get an average of 4 to 5 prospective volunteers on those courses. We can fast track as well so that we can do one-to-one. But again, we will be creative with how we deliver the training, in that we can still move it around to fit in with our audience, basically.
Just to ask Jo then, does that mean you're not using the online materials at all then? You're not sending the volunteers a link to the Learning Centre to have a look at it in advance? No.
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment. No, we do follow Homestart UK's preparation course, because obviously there's some really important parts in that. So we do follow that, but no, we don't give them anything in advance. They come in and they do all the learning in a learning environment, whether that's one-to-one or in a group. I mean, we do offer additional training moving forward. I mean, we're really fortunate in Hull. We can tap into a wealth of additional training for lots and lots and lots of different things. So we can then pass that on once the volunteer has completed the course.
That's wonderful, Jo. And Kathy, I can see there's a little bit of conversation going on in the chat about volunteer training. And if anybody has any further questions that they'd like to add in, then please do add some questions into the chat. We're happy to disseminate them. I think we normally do, Yvonne, with webinars. If we have extra questions and we run out of time, I know it's very normal practice that we'll disseminate those through after the event and share those updates. Also, just to say, for those of you in the chat who've asked if we can add you to the relevant group on At Home, yes, absolutely. If anybody else wants to join the volunteer coordinator group on At Home, please just sort of leave your message in the chat and I'll action that after this session. Conscious of time, we will firstly thank Jo for her time and for joining us today. It has been wonderful to have you. It's been really wonderful to have Ellen and Alison as well, although I know they can't be here in person, but it's definitely a different experience kind of being interviewed and asked questions live. So thank you so much, Jo, for agreeing to step in at last minute to help us. We really do appreciate that. And if Yvonne, if you have that QR code for the feedback form, we would be really grateful to grab some feedback from members of the audience who are still able to be with us, and maybe have a few moments to give us some feedback before you head off into your afternoons. So thank you everyone for coming along today. We really do hope you enjoyed the session. And I wonder if you would be kind enough to just join me in a little virtual kind of clap and thank you to Jo, because I really enjoyed that myself, and I think that was really wonderful. Thank you so much, Jo, for your time.